secretary, I will add in that if anybody has guests, I will introduce you to introduce your guest. You just put it in the chat box or raise your little hand.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate it. All right, I see a few more people coming in, and we'll get started here in just a minute. Welcome to those of you just joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute. We still have people joining the meeting, and we'll get started here momentarily. So welcome. All right, thank you so much. Skylar, if you will now mute all the participants. And Skylar has already started recording, so if you missed that message, I'm now notifying you we are recording the meeting and live streaming on Facebook. So hello, fellow Rotarians. My name is Terry Goldman. I am your president-elect nominee and membership chair this year. President Reed and President-elect Maria Schell are both away this week, and so you get me for the hour, and it's my privilege and honor to be leading our meeting today. Here is my bell sound. Hopefully it works. There we go. Okay. Gotta love YouTube. So as we start our weekly meeting, I would like to ask that you join me in reciting the four-way test. Skylar will put that up on the screen for us. All right. So number one, is it the truth?
The truth.
Number two, is it fair to all
concerned?
Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships?
Build goodwill and better friendships.
And number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? All right, Skylar, will you mute everyone again for us, please? Thank you so much. Well, welcome, except for Carol, who's going to help us on this one. So welcome all guests. At this time, it is, I ask any Rotarians who have invited a guest to please raise your hand so that you can introduce your guest to the club. If you're a visiting Rotarian who came on your own, please raise your hand and introduce yourself to us, or let us know you're here in the chat box. Carol, do you see any guests today?
I do not. I don't see anything in the chat box or any hands.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate it. Oh, we do. We have Mr. Redline.
Hi, how are you?
Hello. Please introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. I'm part of the Portland New Generations Rotary Club. I was a president there some years back, Rotary Foundation chair, and I've actually, when I moved out here from Vermont about 10 years ago, I checked out your club initially for about a year and just thought it'd be good just to re-engage a little bit and to see what you guys are up to, current state, and be more connected with your club as well.
Awesome. Awesome.
Welcome. And Cameron.
Hello, my name's Cameron. I'm checking out Rotary. I worked with the Rotary Club in Iowa in college, and I'm kind of at a stage of my life where I can get back into it.
Awesome. Awesome. And Ken's waving his hand, Carol, I see.
Okay, Ken.
You're muted, Ken. You're still muted, Ken.
Still muted. If you press the space bar, then we can hear you.
Hi, yeah, I was actually just waving to Cameron and welcoming him to the club.
Awesome, awesome. Mr. Redline, is your first name pronounced Britain like it looks, or?
Yeah, Brit or Britain, either way.
Okay, Brit or Britain. Okay, well, welcome Cameron and Britain. Very glad to have you both joining us today. And is there anyone else that's joined us today? Double checking. All right. Well, welcome to all our guests. We're excited to have you here today. And of course, thank you to all of our members for joining us for yet another Zoom meeting. We're going to skip to birthdays now. I'd like to wish a very happy birthday to all Rotarians who were born in the month of October. Please check out the list that Skylar's putting up, and be sure to wish anyone celebrating an October birthday a very happy birthday when you get the chance. So awesome. Thank you, Skylar. It is now my pleasure to introduce fellow Rotarian Michael Arthur, who will be presenting this week's reflection.
Thank you, Terry. You're doing a good job filling in. Good afternoon, Rotarians, and welcome to any guests that are with us. I'm going to do a poem today, and we've visited Robert Frost a couple times. Drew, I think most recently had something from him. And I found a new one that I really like, and there's kind of 3 themes in it that speak to me. Maybe some different ones will speak to you. One is President Reed is always encouraging us to get into the outdoors and get our eyes off the screens. So I think there's some nature in it, which isn't uncommon for Robert Frost. And then our presenters today are talking about adolescent substance abuse and kind of combining the effects on family of that and just kind of living through the pandemic. There's a couple spiritual principles that come through to me from this poem. One is kind of living 24 hours at a time, a day at a time. And the other is acceptance, not of necessarily bad behavior, but more in the sense of letting God be in charge. So the poem is called Acceptance. When the spent sun throws up its rays on cloud and goes down burning into the gulf below, no voice in nature is heard to cry aloud at what has happened. Birds at least must know it is the change to darkness in the sky. Murmuring something quiet in her breast, one bird begins to close a faded eye. Or overtaken too far from his nest, hurrying low above the grove, some waif swoops just in time to his remembered tree. At most he thinks or twitters softly, safe. Now let the night be dark for all of me. Let the night be too dark for me to see into the future. Let what will be, be. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. That was great. I appreciate it. If any of you are interested in giving a reflection in the future, please reach out to Susan, who is in charge of scheduling reflections. Her email is 2navycaptains@gmail.com, and Skylar will be dropping that in the chat for us. All right. I'd now like to take the opportunity to invite you to our quarterly social hour that will be happening on November 4th at 4:30 p.m. This social hour will focus on getting to know our newest Rotarians, those who have joined within the past 18 months. We haven't had many opportunities to interact with these new Rotarians in person, so this is a great chance to get to know everybody better. The event will be held outside at Hopworks Urban Brewery on Thursday, November 4th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. So dress warmly. And don't worry, there'll be heaters on the patio as well. Skylar will drop the address of the brewery and the details in the chat, and look in the spokes for further details. All right, thank you so much, Skylar. All right, so now we're gonna have our breakout room. So now is the time for the breakout room with a few of your fellow Rotarians. Oh, we also had another guest that joined us. I wanna say a quick thank you to Anna Bledsoe, who put a note in the chat. Welcome, Anna. She partners with our speakers today. So welcome and glad to have you joining us as well. So our breakout room today, you're welcome to chat openly with your fellow Rotarians about any topic, but if you need a topic to suggest, I'm going to stick with being the membership chair, and I would love you all to talk about just one new Rotarian that you, or some person in your life that you think would be interested in Rotary that you can invite to one of our future club meetings and be a potential Rotarian to join our club. So Skylar's going to go ahead and break us up. We'll see you in a few minutes. And remember, just one is all we're asking for this year. People are still popping back in. Welcome back. People are still popping back in. So we'll give it just a moment and I'll turn it over to our chair of the day for today. All right, looks like we are back. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you had some great conversations and you've all identified at least one new Rotarian that's going to join our club this year. And I would love for you to, you can either direct message me that name and I will happily work with you and follow up, or you can email me and I will put my email in the chat shortly, but it's Terry, Terry.w.goldman gmail.com. That's my personal email address, and happy to connect with you about getting them, the potential members that you talked about in your conversations, to learn more about Rotary and join our club, hopefully very soon. Well, I'm going to turn it over to our chair of the day. And so will you please welcome past president and Rotarian Dev Dion as our chair of the day. Welcome, Dev.
Thank you, Terry. It's my pleasure today to introduce Shelley Campbell. She's the coordinator for injury prevention and education, outreach education, youth and families at Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center. And Shelley is our speaker, and I also want to welcome Mary Kay Michaels, co-chair of Big Village. A little bit about our speaker. Shelley has been an RN for over 40 years. 27 of those years were in the operating room, with the main role as pediatric nursing coordinator in the operating room and coordinator of an adult trauma team. Shelley is currently coordinator of injury prevention and outreach education, youth and families with trauma service, and the Trauma Nurses Talks Tough program at Legacy Emmanuel Medical Center. Among her activities, as she's doing today, she presents to the juvenile court classes on youth and alcohol and marijuana in Columbia, Lincoln, Multnomah, and Washington counties, and the Beaverton, Oregon Peer Court. Please welcome Shelley as she discusses adolescent brain maturation and the effects that alcohol and marijuana have on developing brains. Shelley?
Thank you very, very much for having me talk about a topic I'm very, very passionate about. I'm going to try and share my screen, if that's possible.
Skylar, you can help if needed.
Doesn't look like it's going to pull up. Try it one more time.
Skylar, can you make Shelley a co-host and allow her to do that?
Yeah, she should be able to share the screen automatically, but.
Oh, there we go. Awesome.
There we go.
Thank you, Skylar.
Let's see if I can go from the beginning. Okay, we're going to go through this a little quick because this is a pretty involved presentation, but I think it's important, if we're going to talk about adolescent use of substances, that we have an idea of where the youth are in terms of their brain maturation, so we really truly get a feel for what the risks are. So this is going to be real quick neuropathophysiology, so just kind of bear with me. First of all, human brains mature from the back to the front, and you're seeing a little bit of a picture here. It was a very famous article that came out in Time Life magazine many, many years ago that showed the development of a human brain and how the back, which is most people would relate to as our physicality, our ability to see and hear and talk and move and balance and coordination, are the parts of the human that actually mature first. So when you look at this, the part that is 100% mature, it's kind of a little confusing, is the purple. So if you take a look at it at age 5, there's no purple. So a lot of that brain absolutely is under construction. If we jump up here to age 16, you can see the very small amount of purple that is beginning to occur. The area in the front, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but in the very front, which is our frontal lobe, is the part of the brain that is the most important for all of us to function as an adult. It is our ability to use logic and judgment, to understand right from wrong. Those parts of our brain are literally the last to finish. And if you take a look at age 20, it is still not done at age 20. And in fact, that frontal lobe part of our brain doesn't finish maturing until between the ages of 25 and 28, which is quite a while. So that prefrontal cortex of the human is responsible for logic, short-term memory, our judgment, decision-making, and the ability to make the choices that we do, our control, think of our control of emotions, specifically guilt and remorse, our motivation and inner drive, social behavior and some social interactions, begins maturing about the age of 12 and reaches maturity between the ages of 25 and 28. Now think about all of the pressures and all that we require and ask of people in their teens and early 20s. All of the decisions they must make. All of those things are literally still under construction. And while they're maturing, they're really fragile. That area of the brain becomes fragile and at risk. Now, if we take a look at executive functioning and a little bit of the change in terms of focus for youth and in terms of where their brains are. If we take a look at elementary middle school kids, they're very task oriented. They're really kind of flexible in their thinking. They're kind of like all over the place. They are just beginning to plan and prioritize things that they do, just beginning to learn about organization. They do have a working memory, so they can draw on their memories. They are now beginning to self-monitor. So, is what they're doing right or wrong? They're beginning that. And selective attention, as we all know, that age group has very selective attention. Things that are interesting to them, they'll focus on, otherwise they let it go. And their coordination. Now look at the change up to middle school. All right, now that part of the prefrontal cortex is beginning to mature. Now we've got into that, the beginning. So now we have children that are beginning with their abstract and conceptual understanding of ideas, morals, okay? They are now beginning to control their impulses, where you take a little kids, they just kind of do. Now in middle and high school, they're beginning to get some control of those impulses. And we still know how impulsive their behavior can be. They are developing skills in problem solving because they need to have logic and the understanding of judgment, be able to problem solve. Decision making. Again, that judgment thing comes in. Emotional regulation. And we know, again, how difficult that is, especially for high school kids, to regulate their emotions and control them. Their ability to tolerate frustration. Now, think about that compared to preschool and elementary school kids who have absolutely no control over that. Now we're moving into middle and high school where they're beginning to get it. Not all the way there yet, but they're beginning. And then the ability to feel empathy. And that's where we get the ability to know and understand right from wrong, to understand how our actions affect others. And that's now beginning to develop for them too. So I'm going to back up a little bit here because our time is a little constrained. When we talk about alcohol and we talk about cannabis, those two drugs are very alike in many ways and very different in many ways. One, they're alike because they both have been around for a very, very long time. Another is they've been basically socially acceptable drugs. They're both drugs, and they're basically socially acceptable for many, many, many years. Another reason that they're alike is both of these drugs have changed and evolved over time in terms of potency. When we take a look at alcohol, it used to be a really common, it didn't matter what can of beer you would pick up, it would be 3 to 5% alcohol in content. Today, we have microbrews and all kinds of alcohol pops and all of those types of things that have vastly increased in their alcohol content. And so it's not uncommon to find some of them are 12 to 15% alcohol content. If you can compare that to a regular can of beer at 3 to 5, you are tripling or more the amount of alcohol content per serving size. The same thing as cannabis. It used to be that we had a very low rate of percentage of THC, which is the component that is what we talk about. It's the part of the drug that is affecting the brain. Okay, and so that amount of THC content per plant has increased as we've hybridized and increased agricultural production of those plants. They're increasing the amount of THC content in them, but it doesn't stop there because then they distill out even higher concentrations of THC in a variety of forms, whether it's drinking, in creams you can rub on yourself, in foods, or even in smoking, up to approximately 98 to 99% pure THC in some forms, which is a massive amount of the drug compared to what we would have seen, in years past. So they've increased in that too. So we now have 2 drugs, been around for a long time, that have vastly changed over the last years, both in social acceptance, but also in terms of the potency of the drugs. The next way they're alike is both of those drugs affect the same part of the brain first, and that is the prefrontal cortex. Both of those drugs are going to affect that part of our brain responsible for abstract and conceptual understanding, our impulse control, our ability to problem solve, our decision making, judgment, our control of emotions, and tolerating our frustrations, and the ability to feel empathy. And when you look at those abilities that part of the brain controls, and you think of people you have seen who have used, and you think about how their behavior alters, it's really easy to see the effects of these drugs on that part of the brain. Where these 2 drugs are very different is that they affect the brain differently. Alcohol affects the process of a brain cell in terms of processing, thoughts. It basically turns the brain cell off. And we can go a little bit further here and take a look at a brain cell. They're made up of a cell body. These things coming off are dendrites, which receive information. And we have a long axon that carries information away from the brain cell. Think of it as a computer with a lot of feeders coming into it, feeding a computer information that it then processes. And then that processed data is sent from a cable to other computers. And when you link them together, they form a network of data processing, and that basically is your brain, okay? What happens with alcohol is it turns the main computers off, these little computers. And in your brain, you have approximately 80 to 100 billion of them, and it starts turning them off. The problem is once they get turned off at a high degree, they don't come back on again. And that can be a big problem. Where THC affects the brain is where the brain processes the information and shares it. So if you take a look at this little picture here, this is a picture of dendrite production. So we're looking at little brain cells. The long tails are the axons. The little hairy things coming off of them would be dendrites. Dendrite production is kicked into high gear during adolescence. Now we're talking about the developing brain and 2 drugs that are going to affect it. If we take a look here at the far left, this would be a child in preschool. Now you can see that dendrites aren't very many. They're just starting to grow. And you can see the progression here in, it'd be the 3rd one over. You're looking at middle school, high school, and you can see the difference from here to early 20s, the massive proliferation of these dendrites. THC affects brain cells where these dendrites reach other cells and process that data. That's where THC affects the brain. So it is affecting the brain literally in a very area that is beginning to mature, and it alters how the brain processes information. So alcohol turns off the processing, and THC alters how that brain cell processes the data. It's because of this proliferation of these dendrites in a very fragile state of the brain that puts that age group at a massive risk to be affected. The synapses is where they connected, where a dendrite shares information is pretty much where THC affects it. Now, it affects it in 2 ways. One, there are neurotransmitters that carry information from one brain cell to the other because they actually don't touch. THC alters the chemical makeup of neurotransmitters. So instead of one cell saying, I'm a dog, or there's a dog, and the other cell hears, oh, there's a dog. THC alters that. So that one cell says, oh, there's a dog. The other cell may hear, oh, there's a cat or a lion or a tiger that's going to hurt me. So it alters that processing of information. And that's where we get paranoia. That's where we get hallucinations, a distortion of reality with that drug. The second thing that THC does is the cannabinoid receptors here, right at each side, control the sharing of information. So think of it as volume control, okay? So cannabinoid receptors monitor the sharing of the information. So we have a nice, normal sharing of data. Well, THC, it alters, it locks into those receptors and takes over control. Think of it as the bully of the receptor world. And in some areas of the brain, it allows an over exchange of data. In some areas of the brain, a under sharing of data. And so an example would be someone who uses cannabis gets the munchies. Basically, it's an overstimulation of the appetite center. Those brain cells in that area start yelling at each other. And in some areas of the brain, it's understimulated. So those areas of the brain where we really want to have good judgment and we really want somebody to be using the logical part of the brain, all that is muted and it isn't processing very well. I don't know where I am on time right now. But the next thing I want to share with you.
Shelley, you have about 10 minutes.
Okay, is during adolescence, something very critical is occurring. So not only are they developing the linking up of all of these brain cells, and I want you to understand during adolescence and early 20s, do not leave out the early 20s. They are developing the brain's capacity to process data, okay, in a logical judgment manner. And so this period is when all of that is developing. By the time someone reaches the age of about 30, they basically got what they're going to get. So this is a very critical period of time to get this process done, all right, and not interfere with it. And so that is occurring now. And we don't want to mess that up. How do they increase their dendrite production? It's by learning, by doing in a positive manner. So the term use it or lose it is very real. So linking up is them making those connections. If they challenge their brain in a positive way, it encourages the brain to produce more dendrites. In other words, the brain is very malleable. If you challenge it, it'll go like, whoa, I need more processing ability, and it starts linking up more. If you don't, the brain goes like, well, I guess I don't need all of this. And what happens is they lose it. It's called pruning, dendrite pruning, and or, you know, if we back up a little bit, it's called neural pruning. And neural, by the way, is, if you ever see that word, it's relating to brain cells themselves. So if the brain doesn't use something, it will prune it away so that it leaves a far more efficient brain to processing information that it is using. As we get older and age, you hear it very frequently, use it or lose it, or in senior centers, you see how they have all of these types of things that they keep seniors busy doing, and they take them places, enrichment programs. You see all kinds of brain teasing games out there. Literally, it's challenging our brain to maintain all of those connections we made in our teens and our 20s. Because if you don't keep that up, you're going to lose them and you're not going to grow new ones. So that's where the use it or lose it comes from. But during this period of time, they're building the capacity that'll carry them through their adult years. And we want them to do that and not to lose them. If they are using a substance and they stop producing the dendrites, we're going to end up with a problem. All right. And we'll look at that here in just a second. So, you know, we've all grown up at times of our lives years ago where it wasn't that big a deal. I mean, think of college as the party years. People were using substances, drinking a lot, and everybody thought that was normal. You go through your 20s, that's when you party. And nobody really truly understood the significance of the effect on the brain at that time. And so we hear very frequently, I hear people say, well, is it really that bad? I mean, shoot, we did it when we were young. But what we don't do is link up what happens with behavior and that use. And we didn't really understand what was happening with brains. So number one, in my world, I see a lot of people who are affected by behaviors that came about while they were using. And I think every one of us know at least somebody who's pretty easygoing and mild-mannered until they use, and then they become loud and obnoxious and belligerent, argumentative. We know people who have used that then do things that are extremely risky behavior, and they think it's hysterically funny because they've lost that judgment to understand at the risks they're actually putting themselves and others at. We also have a problem with addiction. So 90% of adults who struggle with addiction literally began using when they were young and in their teens. Because what happens is the drugs begin to affect the pleasure center of the brain. And as it is affecting the pleasure center, we all like pleasure. Our brains love pleasure. And so they become getting a liking for it, and they wanted a higher degree and a higher degree all the time, till you get to a point where you're not consuming enough to reach the level that the brain has become happy with, and it craves more all the time. And you can't go backwards once that happens. The earlier the use of a substance, the greater the risk of addiction. For those that began using before the age of 15, they're at a 28.1% higher risk of addiction. And you compare this down to if they literally just waited till they were 21, it drops down to 4.3%. But even there is a risk. And so, it becomes and behooves us to understand that, especially when, and we just talked a little bit about that, the dopamine is a drug that makes us it's the happy part of your brain. I want you to notice where your dopamine release is. Remember, we talked about that synapse where the dendrites reach each other? That's where your dopamine's released. And remember, we talked about THC that controls that exchange. And it also increases in a release of the dopamine. And the brain begins to like that a lot. And it wants a higher and higher amount of that dopamine to maintain its happy state. And that's where your addictions come in. So these are some scans of brain activity. What we do know is that when someone begins using, now remember, we go back to the alcohol that has turned off the production of or processing of data. When we turn that off, the maturity of the brain becomes arrested. And I think it's important to understand that. So someone who begins using young, by the time they begin, using at a relatively moderate to high degree, they arrest the maturity of the prefrontal cortex. It stops. And, I don't know if I know people who partied hard in their teens and 20s. And by the time they reach their 30s and 40s, they're still acting like they're a teen. It's because that logic and part of their brain, that judgment, to be able to judge, to be able to even understand where they are in terms of their use, has been stopped, and they don't understand and they don't know. It's like interventions, you hear about them frequently. You're now talking to people who have lost the ability to realize where they actually are in their use and how they're actually being affected. Skip a little bit. We talked about that. So here's just a look at some of the other drugs to give you an idea. So here's normal, and I want you to notice all of the bright light areas is normal cell processing. Here is a cocaine abuser, and by the way, this is only after 10 days. You can see how little of the brain is now processing, and this is after 100 days. So after 10 days of use, once they stopped, This is how much of it has actually come back. After 100 days, you've got more coming back. But if you compare this brain to this brain up here, that brain has not reached its normal capacity and may never reach its normal capacity. Okay. We talked about this. I'm going to skip through here a little bit. One thing I am going to mention before I stop, because I don't want to inundate you with a ton of just science here, is that the liver plays a massive part in all of this too. And we don't often interject the liver's role. The liver's job is to metabolize toxic substances out of our system, especially those that affect our brain cells. Our problem is your liver doesn't fully mature until you're about the age of 23. Now think about that. We have a legal drinking age in our state at the age of 21. The brain is not mature, maybe halfway in terms of our prefrontal cortex. It is still fragile and still growing. We have legalized a drug, and now 2 drugs, that at the age of 21 that affect that exact area of the brain that is maturing. And the liver, whose job is to protect the brain from those substances, is not mature and won't be mature until about the age of 23. And a mature, healthy liver at 23 can only metabolize 1 drink an hour if we're talking about alcohol. 1 an hour. So anyone who is using a larger quantity of alcohol than that an hour has a buildup of alcohol in the bloodstream. And so you've got a higher and higher amount of alcohol in the bloodstream affecting the brain at a higher and higher degree for a longer period of time because the liver can't get it out of the system fast enough. We know that with THC, which is also metabolized through the liver, can be on board for up to 30 to 60 days, depending on the concentrations and frequency of use. So it is stored in the body, so it's going to be there longer. Alcohol is metabolized within hours, but THC is for days, weeks. And so its effects going to continue for even a longer period of time. And so for this age group, the effects and risks on the brain development, if they use during this period of time, is very significant. And so that's kind of what our coalition is about, is to bring this information to youth, to empower them by educating them about the risks so they can make good choices as to use, but also to educate parents, because they are the support system. They are the ones that need to talk to their youth. They're the ones providing, many of them providing substances in their home without understanding the risks that they're actually putting their youth at. And so I'm going to stop there. So if you have any questions that you may ask me, but I'm going to put a shout out that we are always looking for parents and community members that are interested in helping us educate to prevent the youth use of these substances. And so like you recruiting, we're always recruiting and would love to have anybody who would be interested to help us and join us in that quest that we have. So I'm open to any questions, anybody, and I can get rid of this. I'll stop sharing so I make this slide.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Shelley. We appreciate your presentation, so informative. And I'm a parent of 2 teenagers, so this is really vital information and I appreciate it so much. We do have time for 1, maybe 2 questions. And Carol, if you'll identify those who have questions, that would be great.
Yeah, Angelica has a question.
Okay, does this have, first of all, this is amazing information. Every parent should have it. Does this have any effect with smoking? Does that 2 questions. Does smoking affect the brain like that? And then the other one is, when you get to be an adult, an older adult, how many drinks per hour can you have?
Okay, for your first question, Angelica, the effects of cigarette smoking on the brain is different. Okay, what cigarette smoking does is it binds with the oxygen. So you're literally robbing the brain of oxygen. Okay, so the damage from cigarette smoking is the damage to cells from the lack of oxygen. which is a problem. Cells need a lot of oxygen. Okay, so and to answer your second question, is that let's see, remind me your second question. Oh, I answered.
The older you get.
Oh, yes, okay. So the older you get, it depends on the health of your liver, Angelica. You know, did we abuse our livers when we were young? Do we have nice, healthy livers now? So literally is dependent on the efficiency of the liver to metabolize these substances. And for every single person, it's going to be different. And I didn't have time to go into the differences between male and female, which is different in terms of how we process and the maturity. But all of that is linked to how efficient our livers can metabolize it out of our system. Generally, the 1 drink an hour is a rule of thumb for, quote, healthy adults. And that's at 23, not 21.
Dev, you wanted to introduce somebody?
Yes, I'd just like to, I apologize for not doing it earlier. Claire Rajul, I hope I pronounced that about correctly. She's the Big Village Coalition Coordinator, and Mary Kay and Shelley work with her. Thank you.
Thank you, Deb. I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'll ask one myself. Shelley, what about people, we've seen these texts and shows about like people who have cerebral palsy or some other kind of disability that THC seems to help.
Okay, so you have to go back to remembering where we talked about how THC affects the brain cells. Part of it is THC is a cannabinoid and binds with those cannabinoid receptors. And remember, part of that's job was to regulate the exchange of data, by the way, electrically, that's exchanged from one cell to the other. And remember, in some areas of the brain, THC can null that or lower that exchange rate. So in very select cases, THC can null. In cerebral palsy, we have the problem of all of those muscle spasms and things that they have. It can slow part of that down, okay? So it relieves some of that. It's used in very narrow range of newborn infants with a rare seizure disorders, where it also affects at a particular part of the brain where it slows that exchange of electrical data, so it nullifies some of those seizures. But it has to be used in a pointed use. It's not just a blanket for everything. And THC comes in a variety of strains. So they're identifying specific strains to use for a very specific neurological impulse control to control some of those things. I hope that answered your question.
It does, thank you. Terry, I'm gonna turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate it. Let's hear it for Shelley and for a wonderful presentation I think was incredibly informative. All right, so next week we'll be meeting right back here on Zoom at noon on Tuesday, October 26th. We'll be hearing from Carrie Murray, the president of Shelterbox USA. The Rotary Club of Portland will be receiving a Hero Award for financially supporting the Shelterbox USA for many years. I would love to see as many members as possible join this meeting as we receive the award, so please spread the word and encourage your fellow Rotarians to join us next Tuesday at noon on Zoom. Please don't forget, if you have a speaker idea, contact our program committee chair, Dev Daya, and we always look forward to great program ideas, and our programs depend on members taking the initiative. Just thank you to our guests today, Britt, Cameron, Anna, Claire, and Mary Kay. And a huge thank you again to our speaker, Shelley. We appreciate you so much. Lastly, I want to thank everybody behind the scenes that helps our programs run so smoothly, Skylar, Carol, so many others. And a big thank you to Michael for a wonderful reflection today. As we close today's meeting, let's all remember why we're here. We serve to change lives. Let's continue to focus on the lives that we change and continue to step up and do the right thing. Thanks again for joining, and have a great day.
Great to see everyone.